Hello, and welcome to the Safe and Sound Podcast, a podcast about the intersection of music and mental health. Today's episode is one that is a little different than some of the others, and one that I believe is important, though. Today's episode is about music, mental health, and spirituality, specifically through a lens of Christianity. I can wholeheartedly understand if this is not the episode for you. Christianity is fraught with baggage, especially now, so feel free to say this episode isn't for me and skip it. But I also think you'd be pleasantly surprised at the honesty, reflections, and other things on spirituality. My guest is Andy Squyres. Andy has spent his musical career being labeled as a disruptor within the Christian music world. What is so disruptive about Andy is something that really shouldn't be. His songs are vulnerable and authentic. Andy is no stranger to pain and sorrow in his own life, and his songs and poetry bear that out. Andy and I talk about his life, his approach to his own faith, and we wax philosophical about the brokenness of those within a faith that doesn't deal well with shame and introspection, and how politics have become the idol to many Christians. In my eyes, Andy is a disruptor of the greatest kind, and most needed within the Christian faith. I hope you enjoyed the interview.
In the kitchen, and I ask you how your day's been, so you tell me, and I listen.
How I came to your music. I had not heard of you until literally like a month and a half ago. And by all things, it was a meme my brother put on his like worship channel. And it's this this meme of Bert and Ernie like smoking a cigarette outside. And he just put what did he say? I don't even know his name. Who's
Forrest
the
Frank.
Forrest?
Forrest
Yeah.
Frank. Yeah, I made that meme.
Did you?
Yeah.
You're pretty good at it, Andy. Like you're pretty good on the social media
You know,
runs.
if the music thing doesn't work out, I'm considering being a social media meme account.
Yeah.
So,
I'm actually kind of curious just about, do you think what do you think about the fact that music and social media has become so integrated
mhm.
into strategies of marketing and
Yeah.
having a web presence, and you seem to be pretty on top of it. There's a lot of um musicians who tend to hate that
Mhm.
side of it. You seem to kind of enjoy it.
Yeah, there must be something wrong with me because I don't mind it at all. Because I mean, I think it's a reality I've just embraced because I know there's a lot of energy put towards kind of like there's a lot of folks that have issues with you know um things like Spotify and Apple Music and such, because the payouts aren't as they're not they're
They're not
insufficient
lucrative,
as,
yeah.
as they stand, they're insufficient. And then of course all of the critique that we can justifiably offer social media exists for sure, rightfully so. But I think for me, I don't know when this dawned on me, but at some point I realized, gosh, without social media and without platforms like Spotify, I wouldn't have a career as a
Mm.
middle class musician.
Yeah.
I I know that there's a lot of folks calling for a return to the old days of music distribution, but I don't think that there was much of a chance for small independent artists as there is now. I
Sure.
think
Yeah.
I think we tend to romanticize the past, um, and I think that the past had its own issues that maybe has been forgotten by some of
Oh, for
us.
sure. Yeah.
And so for me, I run into artists all the time who don't want to engage with social media, and I understand their reasons why. I really do, because I think my wife Amy and I have a continual conversation around the amount of energy and time and the amount of your soul that it takes to be engaged with social media. It's not a real world. It's not a world that actually exists, but except for in our imagination. Nevertheless, it is how we sell our wares.
Yeah.
If we are we run our little small business out of our home, and the only way people will know about it, whether it's my records or my books or a t-shirt that I have to sell, if I don't get on social media and let people know, then people aren't just, they're not going to know.
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
just, that's the lay of the land. And so I try to be as humorous as I can. I try to be as self-aware as I can. And I try not to take myself too seriously. But I've found that you can be earnest and you can be funny at different times, and it seems like for the most part, at least my audience is up for both. So
Sure.
I try not to only be cynical and clever. I also try to be sincere and push into some level of spirituality, surrounding Christian faith, but I also am fully comfortable with talking about all kinds of other things that may or may not be as appreciated within the evangelical sphere that I'm a part of. And that's fine because I like the fact that I'm kind of an outlier in that world.
Yeah.
And it's an identity I've adopted and embraced. And I think it's maybe even a calling at this point, to kind of be. I hate this technical term, but a disruptor,
Hmm.
So,
Why do you hate that term?
oh, it's like categories, right? Like information or understanding travels furthest the fastest when we use categorical language. And I don't think I would ever describe myself purely as being a disruptor, but I have had folks call me that in one way or another. Uh, but it's like every time, what's that old thing about, like, as soon as you label me, you negate me. I think it's Kierkegaard that said that.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of like, I'm Generation X, so I'm just like calling bullshit on everything, I guess. And that's a design flaw for sure, but nevertheless, it's there.
When you are called a disruptor, are people using it in a positive way or
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I think sometimes, especially within Christian circles, people don't necessarily know what to do with me. So they they've that word has been helpful to some folks, I guess, in their descriptors of me. But like, I do kind of work hard to throw as many people off my scent as I can. I mean, I'm constantly upsetting conservative people, but equally so my progressive audience isn't always happy with me. So, um,
Can't please them all.
yeah,
Yeah.
or you can't please anybody, I guess.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Um
yeah,
That's just it's interesting because like I said, I have come to your music very recently. You owe me an apology because I cannot get your songs out of my head. Like literally, I was like, maybe if I talk to this guy, it'll finally get out of my head.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and either that is the indication of fantastic songwriting, which I would tend to say, uh, or it's some instrument of the devil that is is trying to drive me crazy.
yeah.
But I just want to start. Andy, you grew up on the West Coast, and were you involved in music very early on in your life?
I am a church kid. I grew up in a little Pentecostal denomination called the International Church of the Foursquare Gospel, which is kind of like a fundamentalist, evangelical, Pentecostal, dispensationalist church, that had a fairly um, robust musical expression in a time when that wasn't necessarily uh prominent like it is now. Now every church has a drum set. There
Sure.
there was there was a time in history, um that wasn't the case. And I remember it because we had a drum set in like 1979, and it was you know there it was disruptive again to, maybe I come by this in more ways than I think. But I wasn't ever involved in music in that church, at least until I was maybe out of high school. I'm not a natural musician. I it wasn't like I heard a guitar player or a keyboard player and went, "Oh my gosh, I've just got to do that with my
Yeah.
life." I never had that thought. I had a friend introduce me to songwriting when I was around 18, 19 years old, and that was really the thing that drew me into music making is was uh, writing songs. And so, um, for better or worse, I'm actually always approaching music making from like lyrical concepts first,
Hmm.
probably more than anything. Um, and so, yeah, I probably got into music late teens, early 20s, taking it seriously at that point.
If you were in, so I grew up Assemblies of God, which is, I mean, all the flavors of Pentecostalism and charismatic is really interesting to me because there's so
Yep.
many different expressions. And growing up, what kind of there was a kind of, at least for me, a kind of fundamentalist like secular music, Christian music,
Yeah.
right? We stay away
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
secular music. And what were you listening to during your teenage years, and were you allowed to listen to whatever you wanted?
Yeah, I was definitely involved in I knew about Christian music, and but my folks were not against me listening to just music, so I in high school I was, the music coming out of the UK at that point was like the Smiths and The Cure and Depeche Mode, and all of those bands totally fascinated me. I loved Morrissey and Johnny Marr so much. I digested every Smiths record that came out in those years, late 80s, early 90s. So I remember having some discussions with my mom about some of the bands I was listening to, but they were probably too busy solving other issues to worry about my music habits. Of course, I was listening to U2. The Joshua Tree record came out in 87, so that was definitely blasting out of my room. And their Christian underpinnings were
Sure.
probably heard by my parents, and so I'm not exactly sure what they were thinking, but there was some acknowledgement of, at least, of um well, they just weren't freaking out about any of the music I was listening to, because I wasn't listening to Iron Maiden, and I wasn't listening to, which I eventually grew to love Iron Maiden, but I didn't have Iron Maiden posters on my
Sure.
walls at home.
Yeah.
They weren't freaking out.
Yeah, yeah, those with like the skulls and the zombie,
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
zombie type of stuff. What
Mm.
drew you to songwriting?
Well, I think I was terrible at school, but I was always good at my English classes. So
Mhm.
I think fundamentally very interested in words and in language and in storytelling, and and some of that was intellectual or instinctual. I couldn't have said that to you during those
Sure.
early formative years. I'm
Yeah, that makes
looking
sense.
backwards, of course. Uh, but always had an affinity for language. I read a lot as a young person. Sometimes I've been asked prior to this conversation, um, you know, what was my entryway into poetry, and I have this memory of my dad. My dad was, without going into my parents' story, my dad was a single dad. He was raising me and my brother for by himself for a long time, and he was working and going to school, so he was a very busy guy. But every single night, he always read to us before bed. And one of the books that he read to us was Shel Silverstein's "Where the Sidewalk
Hmm.
Ends," which is just a kid's poetry book.
Yeah.
But I did realize at some point that that was really the beginning of my understanding of irony and metaphor and simile, and the technical terms I didn't know, but I did understand when they were working and how they were working. So
Hmm.
those were internalized at a very early age. Not to mention those poems are very funny.
Sure.
So the comedy and the tragedy piece was there for
Yeah.
me. So
So that was a big gateway for
I
you.
would say so.
Yeah, I think it's honestly, I think I remember reading Where the Sidewalk Ends. I think it's a huge gateway for a
Yep.
lot of kids
Yep.
when they're it's pretty formative, I think. I don't know so much now.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like I just know myself growing up. I was born in 83, so I'm kind of on the
Yeah.
tail end of millennial, but
Yep.
sort of Gen X.
Yeah.
Um, type of thing. I remember this kind of thing growing up. So, during my teenage years, there was like a charismatic revival at my church.
Mhm.
And Gen X was like the lost generation, right? Just as
Yeah.
every single generation is
Yeah.
the lost generation
Right.
beforehand. But I remember that very specifically, that tying in music and just like, the sense of lostness and, being like we were the hope, those in church were the hope of a generation, you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, type of thing. And I often find that people who are creatively linked inside, I guess I can speak for myself, but for a lot of other people, that the way of expressing e- emotion, or acceptable emotion, was through music.
Mm.
Um, in how I grew up, it wasn't acceptable for me, or I felt wasn't acceptable for me to express anger
Mm. Mm.
within, but I found it through music, and I found
Yeah.
it through writing. Um, and through, I think, a lot of my own mental health struggles as a teenager, kind of going and using that as an outlet. Um, and I'm curious if that was kind of the same for you, or has been the same for you. I guess it's more when you were younger. It sounds like some things were maybe heavy growing up, but being able to express yourself in that way.
Yeah. I think I probably couldn't put those words together. Looking back, I feel very unself-aware when in my younger years. I feel like I was um my folks, part of my story is that my folks divorced when I was really young, and so I was kind of doing this like back and forth between my mom and dad's house, and I, without getting into any of the details of that, uh that I would say that caused me um a lot of pain that I didn't know existed. Like when you're in survival mode,
Mm,
you don't have the processing power to analyze what's actually going on in your life.
yeah,
And I wasn't around anybody who had any language to do that. It could have just been, the time in human history where like therapy speak wasn't as
sure.
available to us. So I don't ever recall searching out music uh, in a therapeutic, looking for catharsis through
Hmm.
music.
Yeah,
But maybe that was happening. But I
sure.
I I I probably was doing other things in my life for for some type of relief of tension, which weren't good things. Just reckless teenager
Yeah.
behavior that was more um probably the things I was aiming at rather than music itself. Um, yeah.
So just in terms of like, you get into songwriting, you you graduate high school. Did you go on to college or any
No,
exit
I
studies?
didn't. I immediately after high school, I just started working, various jobs, just trying to make ends meet. I didn't, like I said earlier, I was just terrible at school. Um, Yeah, I feel like I've been unpacking not going to college for my entire life. Feels a little bit like a missed opportunity, but I trust God that He's able to redeem the things that I have regrets over in my life. But one thing I did do was I married young. Amy and I got married when we were 20, and I think probably my reaction to my childhood, we're all kind of like reacting to our childhood in some
Yeah.
way. Like
Hmm.
your adulthood is reacting and recovering from whatever version of your childhood that you had. I think that I unknowingly aimed at building a stable world for myself because I didn't have one growing up, or at least I didn't feel like I had one. Maybe I did have one. I'm very grateful for both my parents, and I think all things considered, they both did wonderful jobs raising me in the circumstances being what they were. Um, but I think going to college, getting a career, those things. I'm a heart guy, and those things were not anything I cared about really. But my heart was probably aching for a family,
Hmm.
like a stable landing place, a shelter where I could go and rest. And so, um, when Amy and I started dating and eventually fell in love and got married, we did it very young. And I know that there's a lot of data out there that says that that's not necessarily the wise thing to do, but for us it worked very well. And getting married and eventually having kids ended up being a real gift to me, and it slowed down my artistic journey, but it actually gave me something to say in the long run,
Mm.
that I think if I had just focused on music early on in my life, well, first of all, I just didn't have anything worth saying.
Yeah.
But there were other areas of growth in my life that needed to happen in order to be able to kind of like, artist development is not something that's can be driven by commerce. If we believe in the work of the Spirit, which I do. I happen to believe that um, mankind cooperates with this the heavenly realm. Um, if we have some type of creative calling or vocational calling in the arts, having something to say is very important. And I think that there's a lot of music and art out there that gives the impression of substance, but is maybe not so much meaningful. And I'm not saying, I don't want to make the case that all music and all art has to be meaningful. I think there's legitimately a place for entertainment.
Hmm.
Entertainment is important. We need it. I mean, you can't put on Andy Squyres records at a party, and there's a reason for
It's
that,
true. Yeah.
Um, so I don't want to be dismissive about that. Like, you know, anyways, all that to say that at least when it comes to my own artistic voice, I needed some water to run under the bridge in order for me to develop to a place where I actually could do what I was called to do. And I don't know that we talk about that very often in creative circles, that the the voice of the artist sometimes needs to live life. It
Mm.
needs to live life before it can actually tell a story.
Yeah. Where? Why don't you think we talk about that?
Because um because we believe this lie that we have to achieve our artistic zenith by the time we're 25 or 30.
Hmm.
And that flows out of like, youth culture, you know, it's probably a lot of sex drive, like all of the hormones and physiology of the young human body uh is like is it's what all human beings want, but we all grow old, right? Like,
Right. Yeah.
but the illusion is that the most important part of your life is happening from the time you're 15 to the time that you're 30. And I I would say it is definitely significant. Like,
Hmm.
you want to make good choices in those years, but with regards to like what they're selling, what culture is selling, is telling a lot of people that if you don't achieve your artistic dreams by the time you're 25 or 30, then you failed. And I would fight that with everything within me, because there's too much life to be lived after the age of 30 to like
Yeah.
hang up your creative hat because you didn't make a record before you were 30 years old.
Well, I think also just from my perspective, there's like you were talking about having something to say, right? And I
Yeah.
feel like when you're, I don't know, sometimes when you're younger, you have um a zealousness or ideas or things that you want to say or want to get out there.
Yeah.
And I think I have two kids. I'm 42. I have a 7-year old and a 4-year old now. And some of it is that feeling because I used to be in bands and I had something to say. I had something to express.
Yeah.
Um, and I think for me at one point I was just like, I don't think I'm gonna make it. You know what I mean? Like I had this desire and this drive to kind of make it, but I lost what I wanted to say. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? I had nothing to say. And in my own creative endeavors, I'm creating music, but I still don't feel like I have anything to say lyrically.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that concept of where people find stuff to say or how like I'm curious for you about that process of when did you start finding something to say?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. That is a really good question. So, as a person of faith, I lived within the realm of the Christian world, and associated with that world is the world of Christian music. And for a large portion of my adult life, at least, I tried to fit my desire to create good music into the existing template of
Hmm.
Christian music. And I found it so limiting as to be almost offensive to me. And nevertheless, I spent years trying to hammer into that thing. Um, but what really opened the door to my artistic life was some significant seasons of suffering
Hmm.
that I had not experienced before. And what really happened was it's my music is really me theologizing my life.
That's what I
You know,
find wonderful about it.
yeah, it's not for everybody for that reason, but for those that have that same inclination, it's really me wrestling with maybe the ideas about God that I had, being struck by a reality that these ideas couldn't contain or
Mm,
or make sense of. And so turning to my songwriting and going, okay, damn all the CCM, contemporary Christian music, expectations of what I should or should not say. I'm not going to ask myself, can this play on the radio? I'm going to make great art for the sake of art. No other agenda involved. And that was the thing that really enlivened me, pushed me into the place that I'm at now. because I don't have the constraints of you know, expectations that I have to sound or say a certain thing in order to be accepted within a certain, demographic. Now that's a little bit self-sabotaging when it comes to, making a career in Christian
Sure.
music. I'm a niche within a niche, which significantly diminishes who's actually going to be willing to listen to what you're putting out there. But here's the thing I found is that, man, well, when people are not ready to hear what you're doing, that's fine. That's
Yeah.
just the way it is. But when they come in contact with their own kind of version of like their idea of God, being struck by a reality that they did not expect, then when they listen to my music again, they're like, oh, now it makes sense.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's just like a book that you buy. You're like, the title intrigues you, the cover intrigues you, you spend the $20 on it, and then you go home and you put it on your shelf. And then a few years later, you're walking past it and you're like, I should pick that up. And then you pick it up and you're like, this is incredible. Why didn't I read it 3 years ago? Well, it probably wasn't time yet.
Yeah.
So,
I'm really interested in you staying, I guess, within the evangelical church.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
I just a little bit about me. I ended up getting my master's in counseling psychology, but it was at a theological seminary,
mhm.
a place called the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. And it really embraced the arts, and it
Yeah,
really embraced, we had like artist residencies,
yeah,
and we had, it, I took a class, remember, called Creativity and the Artistic Impulse.
yeah,
And just the desire to create and do things and put them out there, and talking about whether or not, are where this artistic impulse is born
mm,
within us and how it is expressed, and really the idea that something is kind of bearing
yeah,
from the inside, that God has kind of given, and how we express that. It kind of like everybody can be creative or
yeah,
connect with the divine in that type of way, or even in the mundanity of life,
yeah,
type of thing. And so I it came from an evangelical tradition,
yeah,
where I was heavily involved in youth group and music, and I'm really thankful for all
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Um, but theologically, I just felt really adrift,
yeah,
um, until I got to that sort of seminary type of thing.
yeah,
And what has kind of kept you within that tradition of faith, I
yeah.
suppose?
Well, I get this question a lot actually, because I all my Anglican friends swear I'm Anglican. Like they're always trying to convert me, and the truth is that I have my internal theology is it's like a mongrelization of Anglicanism and Orthodoxy with a smattering of Catholicism. Uh, but I remember reading an interview with Stanley Hauerwas one time where somebody was asking him about why he remained Methodist after all of these years, and I don't think he's actually Methodist anymore. I think he's Catholic at this point, but at the time of this interview, somebody's asking him like, why are you sticking around with these fuddy-duddy Methodists? The things that you're saying are so beyond what they're doing, whether locally or publicly. And he said, I was marked by the Methodists. The Methodists are who I was formed by them,
Mm,
and I never forgot that. And I think that we live in the age of reaction where um, the possibilities of deconstruction are almost endless to us now because we have we have the most powerful tool on the planet now, the internet, and all information is accessible. And um, Whereas in maybe 20, 25 years ago, you were only reading the books that your tribe was publishing,
Right.
because it was just harder to find other voices, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of us have experienced this unraveling of the narrative that we were given. And so I think for me, I still remain evangelical because I think when push comes to shove, I still have some evangelical convictions. Like I would say boldly that I I like introducing people to Jesus Christ. I think that's a wonderful project worth pursuing.
Yeah.
I don't go about it the same way as, my evangelical brethren do. And I mean, we don't need to get into the metaphysics or theories of atonement and all those types of things, but I probably differ in some of the mission, the understanding of the mission. I probably have differing views of ecclesial um, happenings. But here's the thing. The reason why I'm explicitly evangelical charismatic is because I learned about God from the charismatics in a way that still is potent to me to this day. Like the way I think about God, the way I interact with the Spirit, and the way those things affect my art is because of my people. It would be a crime against myself if I disassociated with them at this point.
Mm.
Even though, like, I mean, one of our downsides is like our going to bed with Christian nationalism. Like a lot of that. Um, my people have kind of like sold their birthright for a bowl of stew,
Right.
Um, but I think leaving at this point wouldn't be a feather in my cap. I'd rather stay, and I'd rather maybe sound the alarm if I can,
Mm.
and be in relationship with people, because I think a lot of the protesting and a lot of the Facebook posting and a lot of the publicly wringing our hands is is warranted, but what I've noticed is that it's only by staying in actual relationship with people when I have a real voice into somebody's life.
Mm.
And so, it's in a world where you're rewarded for choosing a side and saying the most outrageous thing that you can to your base.
Yeah.
I try to remain as ecumenical as I can because I believe that the love of Christ is ecumenical. And whether I have opinions, I have my own opinions on politics. I have my own opinions on church. I have my own, theological convictions, but at the end of the day, I don't want to swing a sledgehammer in the direction of somebody that disagrees with me. Um, I don't know, because for the sake of doctrinal purity or for the sake of just being right, or I don't know, man. I just would rather stay close to people rather than build a platform of you know intense arguing or something like that.
Yeah, that seems like a really hard place to be these days.
No, it is. It's
Yeah.
not a way to grow your platform, I'm telling you.
Yeah. Yeah. What have you seen as far as pushback on that?
Well, I mean, I'm not always invited to every party. I mean, I think that sometimes people don't know what to do with me. They assume I'm just like a dirty old deconstructor, and like I don't know, man. I feel as orthodox as ever. I feel as committed to the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed as ever. Um, I feel more, probably more than ever before. I feel more persuaded that Jesus Christ is actually the Savior of the world. Um, but I just also feel perfectly comfortable, you know, making my songs sound like a rated R movie if they need to be,
Right.
if the story needs to be told in that way. I don't I'm not trying to like um run interference for God's reputation.
Sure.
I'm not trying to convince people of the goodness of God because he does miracles and you can live your best life now if you follow him. I'm not on that track at all.
Yeah. Do you think, do you feel like there's a certain segment that is a dirty deconstructor? That's sorry, I'm just pondering that.
Well, I'm that's tongue in cheek when I
Yes,
say
yeah, no, 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 100%.
yeah.
It's just kind of going through my mind. Is what do you think is feels threatening to people about um, what you're doing?
Well, I think when you broaden the vocabulary with in speaking about God, generations worth of settled doctrine, theology, whatever, however you want to call it, becomes is challenged.
Yeah.
And I think for many people, um, I mean, I forgive me for saying this. I don't want to be offensive, but I think a lot of people trust in what they believe about God
Right.
more than they trust in God himself.
Right.
So the project that they're working on, because somebody told them this, is that the the most important thing is to have right doctrine. And so in essence, they've built an idol, a false god out of having perfect doctrine.
Hmm.
In the charismatic church, wouldn't be having perfect doctrine. It would be having a wonderful experience, right?
Right.
That would be our version of that idol.
Yeah.
In some more like middle of the road evangelical circles, it would be like the mission of evangelism would be their false god. So anytime you challenge any of those ideas that have built power structures around them, there's always an outworking to these ideas. Somebody comes along and says, well, I don't necessarily know why I don't agree with that, but here's a poem about nothing. And
Yeah.
everybody in the room goes, well, one, I don't know what that means. And
Right.
two, it sounds like you're speaking blasphemy. And three, we don't have time for that because
Mhm.
God's on the move. And Kathleen Norris, who is a poet, she talks about this thing called the necessary other. And she's referring to artists and poets and songwriters who just seem kind of out of step with the reality of whatever power structure they happen to be living in.
Yeah.
And it's like if you don't have that other voice, that person who's coming along going, yeah, I'm not so sure that the way we're thinking about God in this way is true.
Yeah.
Like even asking the question.
Yeah.
So I mean, but the downside to that is that my friend Paul Antleitner talks a lot about this, is that when deconstruction becomes the goal, the end goal, where do you stop? It's like it's falling into a black hole forever and ever. There's no bottom. everything becomes deconstructible, everything becomes um, challengeable. I heard James K.A. Smith say one time that we live in the age of a contestability, meaning never is something said out loud where 1,000 other voices aren't saying, yeah, but,
Yeah.
or, you know, so that causes a lot of undoing for people. So to answer your question, why do people feel threatened by the poet or the writer who's maybe taking a look at God, Jesus' life from a different angle? Is because it undoes their sense of security and
Mm.
safety.
Stability.
And yeah, and I think I think that's a good thing though, because I actually think at the end of the day, um, God does not want us to trust in anything but Himself,
Hmm.
and He's coming for our idols, whatever they happen to be. And so I think that that's probably why I mean, maybe I just don't have enough talent. I don't know. I That could very well be the case. But I think the things that make me feel excited are not threatening, but challenging the just the normal narrative, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. It's really interesting though, because I feel like personally, and I know this is not the majority, but like the what your music kind of brings to me is an authenticity.
Hmm.
And like wrapping it within a, I don't want to say like a therapy context, is that we all crave authenticity. And I mean, part of the work, or part of the reason why I stepped into mental health, was the pure idea that we're the calling of it is to step into darkness, and to be, and to, in the way, I don't consider myself a Christian therapist,
Yeah,
but like the
yeah,
idea that we are to kind of step into the gates of hell with,
yep,
instead
yep,
of trying to call somebody out of it, but stepping in.
totally.
um and just that that we all crave that to some extent. A lot of us are afraid of that, but I
Yeah,
think what's really important is therapy is a safe place to deconstruct and then reconstruct,
yeah,
right? And I feel like within the current movement of deconstruction, that the safe one, it's validating in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of things that come with this, but the safety has been broken in a sense, right? And
mhm.
so it's hard to search out a safe place to reconstruct where
Yes,
somebody isn't,
yes,
calling you blasphemous, or,
yeah, yes.
and I am very, very, very lucky that I found a place like that, and in
Mm,
something in my life, in a church where I could do that.
yep,
um and I just kind of going back to what we were just talking about, my pastor always had this, you know, thing of, uh, once you think you have God figured out, once you
yep,
have this idea that this is how God is you need to start from scratch again.
totally.
The moment that you feel like and I think like this idea of deconstruction, I feel more the idea that, you know, breaking those walls down somehow, it- they're confining in a certain way. I'm trying to figure out like how to say this well, but all it does is expand,
That's right.
and it's like it expands in a completely expansive God,
Yeah,
right? In
yeah,
our understanding. And I find authenticity in your
mhm,
music,
mhm,
and there's authenticity within pain and struggle, but I always hear um, hope
mm,
within the narrative that you talk about.
yeah,
And um, It sounds like a lot of your music is coming from a place of your own personal journey or story
Yeah.
of interacting with God and expanding. Um, some people, is there anybody that you have looked to or taken of course you have, but inspiration within the Christian tradition or within Christian music? I've heard people say, um, Rich Mullins or something like that,
Yeah.
that have you used or gleaned from any Christian songwriters, that have like, yeah, have you seen inspiration within that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rich Mullins is a is you could point to him as a person who gave me permission, you
Mm,
know. I think what we're all doing is we're looking for permission to be human beings, you know, like I think growing up in the church, um I feel like one of the messages I was getting, whether consciously or subconsciously, was, I mean, it's crazy how this works out, because in reform circles, like especially in Calvinist circles, it's like that underlying um grief of total depravity that is who you are as a
mm,
person, like has incredible ramifications on
sure.
our inner world,
Yeah,
right?
100%.
I mean, I'm sure you would know that
Yeah,
as a therapist. Now, in the Calvinist world, that's just the way it is for everybody. In the Pentecostal charismatic tradition, which really flows out of Methodism, which flows out of, Arminianism, they're at least giving people the option to not stay there. Like I don't know that they would use the language of total depravity, but they would
sure.
at least say you're a sinner, you're in a really bad state. But uh, the thing that we're really doing is we're trying to like crucify the flesh because our humanity just sucks.
Right.
Like that's probably the message I got
Yeah.
more
Oh,
than any other message
me
as
as
a young
well.
person. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think guys like Rich Mullins, what I saw them doing was embracing their humanity. Like maybe not so much like, I don't know that Rich ever ended up celebrating himself as a human being, but I think he at least came to terms with the fact that this side of heaven, or this side of the resurrection, there's no amount of therapy or preaching that you can listen to that is going to fully solve your humanity,
Mm,
and that might probably be a design feature, not a flaw. And I think that for me, maybe where there's been a shift in my thinking about humanity as a whole and human beings as individuals isn't the Methodist urge to lean towards perfectionism, like that we can, like, John Wesley, Charles Wesley, start the holiness club and we can all just get super spiritual and kill the flesh so that we no longer have to act like the rotten people that we really are. But like maybe more of just kind of like, yeah, discipleship's important. We want to look more and more like Jesus as we
right.
go. But maybe being a human being is not as bad as we thought it was. Maybe it's so good and important and significant of a thing that God became one.
Yeah.
Like like when you start really getting into like incarnational theology, it begins to like undo some of that. Oh, I just hate myself because God hates me. I hate myself because it's the right thing to do because God hates me.
Yeah.
Like I just don't buy any of that
Yeah.
anymore. And I think that um even our soteriology, like what does it mean to be saved, is asking Jesus into your heart, like is it like a one and done thing? Is salvation a one and done thing? Is it individualized, or is it like, no, we're really like constantly being
Yeah,
saved
constant
as we
process.
give ourselves to Jesus more and more, like, heck yeah, man. I want my kids to say the sinner's prayer and like go to youth group and jump up and down when the praise band starts. I want it all for them. But I have no like misconceptions about what that actually is. It's like
Right.
it's not saving us. It's not even doing that much discipleship. It's giving people an experience within the church, which I think is super vital and important to human beings. Probably for anthropological reasons, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, but uh, but like I think guys like Rich Mullins and writers like Brennan Manning, and I mean, dare I say Philip Yancey at this point, like as much of a tragedy as that is, like I think all of these writers that were kind of like um like willing to admit, I'm a mess, but I'm growing.
Hmm.
I'm growing. And let's not be too hard on ourselves, because Lord knows that the project of personal piety will continue. But man, I have never seen a piety project work. Every move of in the body of Christ that has been based on personal piety has ultimately ended up in some type of moral bankruptcy by the leadership,
Yeah.
and created so much chaos and just backlash, because everybody is kind of like secretly hiding their real life and projecting a false religious life.
I would say that some of the most difficult, and I actually had to kind of step away a little bit from working with Christian clients, specifically because it was so difficult. They would come in and they would be some of the most, how would I even describe it? More extreme stuff,
Yeah.
mental health wise, or
Yep.
things that they had been dealing with,
Yeah.
um, and trying to literally squash inside of themselves,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like it wasn't this is bad, I'm a sinner, and trying to kind of move them through, like, this is really dark, like, let's
Totally.
move into that darkness, and the darkness is just like, well, I'm just here to be fixed and for God to save me, right, in
Yeah.
that way. And
Yeah.
it became such a struggle to get them to talk or engage with their humanity,
Yes.
that it was a hard task for me to do. And now I worked with teenagers and young adults,
Yeah.
but some of the most, dare I say, like, it, just really hard stuff to deal with,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
came through those. Yeah,
So if you're new to my music, you probably don't know my book series. I have a book series called Poet Priest.
yeah,
And these little the passages in these books are like, they're like manic devotionals, but they're not devotionals, because that's just kind of the worst word in the world at this point. But um it's kind of like a public exposure of my life with God and
yeah,
all my hardest questions, right? And in the telling of these tales, a lot of times I'm telling kind of like shameful things about my life, like bankruptcies that I've been through, of one kind or another. And I'm telling these stories, one, because I'm a storyteller and they're compelling stories, and I like hearing stories. So why not tell one that's a good one if it's my own? But I had this thing happen to me. This was a number of years ago, but I'm in New York speaking at a conference, and a young couple comes up, husband and wife, and the young woman is telling me, "Oh, I love your writing so much." She's kind of fangirling at this point, and she's saying nothing but nice things to me. And I'm going, "Oh, this is great. Say more. I need all the support I can get, right?" And her husband's standing beside her, and he's being quiet, but he's being polite, and he's kind of waiting for his turn to talk. And then he says to me, "I really do like your writing. I like your books. I really do. But frankly, I got to tell you," he's like, "so much of the time when I read your work, I'm just really embarrassed for you." And I just started cracking up because I've never had that reaction before from my writing,
Yeah.
but it was fascinating. Uh, and funny enough, he and I came around a few years later and had a follow-up conversation to that. But what I realized was is that, and he admitted to me later on, is that um oftentimes human beings cannot handle witnessing somebody else's pain or
Mm,
embarrassment or shame, because what it does is it it kind of shines a mirror on their own
right.
failures, on their own moments of embarrassment, on their own moments of shame. So sometimes when you tell a story about your own failures, sometimes it's a doorway for somebody else to embrace their own humanity, but oftentimes it's held at arm's length, like,
Sure.
"Oh, no, that's not for me. I can't handle it." And it usually comes from people who've never kind of like stood on the edge of the abyss of their own soul
Yeah.
and peered into their story because it's just too painful. And far be it from me to force anyone to do that. I would never, um, want to say like, "Oh, you have to do this right now on my time frame." And, no, this is all has to be handled gently. And I never want to be forced to do anything, you know, past my own volition. But I did think that was really interesting how tales of heartbreak are not necessarily going to open lines of communication
Absolutely not.
the way that Brene Brown has told us that they would.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say the reason why people come to therapy is because of that secrecy, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and the amount of people that I've also heard say like, I just don't want to be a burden on somebody else.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that kind of fear of vulnerability, especially in the past, has been, I think, especially for males, has been punished in a certain way or made
Yeah.
fun of, or and I think you're absolutely right. There are some of us who are built in a way that crave authenticity, that I think is how we're built, and that is just as valid as anything else. But the
Yeah.
fact that other people aren't able to bear witness to that,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
is incredibly isolating. And there's those, like you said, who don't want that, like,
One of the many downsides of being a Protestant believer is that we don't have a confessional booth.
right.
Like I think so many people need absolution in their life. They
Yeah.
they need a confessor. Um, and it's it's just really hard that we don't have a system of that in the evangelical world.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's talking about accountability groups
Right.
and confess ye sins to one another and ye shall be healed. It's like, okay, yeah, I mean, I get that. But I think when you're going to war against shame, um that that uh that secrecy space is so necessary, I
Yeah.
think. Because
Yeah.
I just think that so many people are just carrying around things that they just would never say out loud. Um, either crimes committed or crimes having been done to them. It's
Yeah.
like, and maybe that's not the end all be all, but it can be a beginning point of healing,
Yeah. Yeah, I
Uh,
think one of my professors was very his name is Dan Allender, was very the whole idea of story.
yeah.
And just he worked very specifically with sexual abuse survivors
Mm,
and
mm.
kind of delving into that shame and that pain and
Yes. Yes.
how it defined you, but also the hope and healing that's
Yeah.
there, right? And like you said, confessional, right?
Yes.
And on the opposite side, it's a calling. It's we have our own confessionals to
Yeah.
have,
Yeah. Amen.
the amount of shame I think that I, I had a very recent mental health, I don't want to say crisis, but it kind of was. And the amount of shame that I still
Yeah.
wrestle with,
Totally.
is difficult.
Yes.
And just kind of, yeah, not knowing what to do with that.
Mm.
And, who's the therapist for the therapist, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
physician heal thyself,
That's right.
type of thing.
Yeah.
Um, but I think I've been incredibly blessed to be in those spaces. And I think maybe it's because I did sort of leave the evangelical space, um, to kind of have some of those experiences. And I think it's really interesting to me. Something that I really struggled with in leaving evangelicalism um, is I was so focused on the feeling, right?
Yeah.
So focused on like if
Yeah.
I can't feel God, there's something wrong, and
Totally.
like what did I do? What's the sin that I committed?
Yes. Yes.
Um, but there was an experience there that
Mhm.
was very real and very exciting and very
Yes.
close. And when I left that and got more into heady theology stuff,
Yeah.
like that, it there was no it was yeah, there was no real melding of the two, and there's a
Yeah.
part of me that misses that experiential type of
Yes.
thing,
Yes.
because you can get too in your head about things.
Man, can I just say, and I know this is probably a little bit off course of our original
Sure.
conversation, but I feel like you've just identified something that I believe that I want to work on for the rest of my life, which is I would love to build a theology on doxology
Yeah.
that was like a compelling case for kind of the better parts of charismatic worship, but I would like to do it. I feel like if I could imagine a future of worship, like I have a lot of friends, as I mentioned earlier, in the Anglican Church, and the Anglicans are theoretically charismatics, but their liturgy never leaves room for spontaneity, like the surprise of the
Right.
Spirit, right?
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of like abstract hopes of the melding of the liturgy and the outbreaking of the Spirit.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's my greatest hope is like, man, if I could convince my charismatic brethren that they could be expressive as a response to the joy of being alive without any of the guilt
Mm,
of like having to stand on their heads and do the rain dance in order to get God to do something like show up.
right.
I feel like it would just be such a benefit to the body of Christ because I like a lot of my more intellectual friends, it's like worship is like it's the boring part of church. It's
Yes.
the part where they're just trying to get
Yeah.
through that so they can get to the teaching. But the reason that exists is because they're totally locked. They like worship is like a disembodied experience for them. Like
Yeah.
they're all up in their brains, and they're looking down on any type of emotional expression as if emotion was inherently negative. But I think some of my greatest experiences, I will use that word, experiences with God, or understanding who God is and how he thinks about me, have come through kind of like flow state, ecstatic, emotional, musical experiences. And I don't think that that's necessarily manipulation, like any more than like a masterpiece of Picasso or
Right.
Van Gogh would be.
Right.
They're trying to touch the heart of the human soul by keeping their aesthetic in a certain way so that people will feel it, right?
Right. Yeah.
So sorry, I took a little
No,
run.
that's amazing. That's amazing, because I think like that is yeah, it's essential, and I've not found a way to like touch both, right? Really
Yeah,
love Episcopalian like
yeah,
theology and social justice, and my wife
yes,
and I tried to go there a couple times, and I was like, I love what they're saying. I
yeah,
cannot get over this dry liturgy. Like it is,
yeah,
I need something to feel and to move, and if I want to play worship, I don't want to be sitting, like I'm not going to be going, crazy and dancing, but just
right.
an expression of something. You know what I
Anything.
mean?
Yeah, give
Like,
me
yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah. And like, I think that that expression is also divine as well. You know what I
Totally,
mean? And
totally.
it's so hard. Like, I wonder why it's so hard to meld the two, you know?
Yeah, I just think we haven't quite seen a forerunner on this yet, but I do believe that we will see it. I think there's a lot of people, not a lot. I think there's a fair amount of people who are thinking into this, and I
Yeah.
really am hopeful about the future with regards to that.
Yeah, I know very specifically my brother tries to write music or worship songs that he did this for quite a while, and at one point he was just like he's like worship, this is a long time ago when he was very involved in, I would say, charismatic stuff. He was just like, there's a lot of bad theology
Yeah,
in worship
yeah,
songs,
it's true.
and how do I create something? He wrote this song at one point that was with a buddy of his, and it was called "What Where I Am Is Where You Are," and this idea, the chorus is, just like my skin, I forget you're there, so
Mm,
close I take you for granted, your presence here, my constant atmosphere, where I am is where you are. And
yeah,
that kind of idea of like, God is all around is and is able to be experienced, whereas in charismatic theology it was like the spirit shows up, that's that's where it happens, that's where
right.
we encounter God.
Yeah,
Right? We encounter God
yeah,
in church, and we encounter God when we're begging him to show
yeah,
some sign,
yeah.
And it blew my mind. I went to Oral Roberts University for 2 years, and I had a professor there. Um, I don't know why this blew my mind, because it kind of shows you how deep and entrenched it was, where he was talking about seeing God in the secular, right? And how do we
Yeah,
experience God in a secular painting and all these things? And I was like, my mind is, you know what I
yes,
mean? That could
yes,
even be possible,
yes. What a
like,
freeing thought. What a
yeah,
freeing thought. Yeah.
um,
Man, Jeremy, I'm gonna have to go.
yeah. No, this has been excellent. I really enjoy this, Andy. I really appreciate you
Awesome,
taking the
man.
time to
Yeah,
to
thanks for
talk
having
this
me
stuff.
on. It was
Yeah,
fun.
absolutely. All right. Have a great day, Annie.
All right, man. See you down the road.
Yep. Bye.
All right, bye.
I'd like to thank Andy for coming on again. You can catch him on tour through the beginning of March. For dates and tickets, you can go to Andy Squyres, SQUYRES.com. Safe and Sound is a labor of love by me, Jeremy Houtsma, licensed mental health therapist. Please subscribe to the podcast for updates and new episodes. You can follow the podcast on Instagram at Safe and Sound Podcast. Stay tuned for our next episode in 2 weeks with Ben Jorgensen of Armor for Sleep. See you later.